I decide who lives in this valley. Not your servant. It's a train to Valero.
Not when I'm the landlord here.
She slammed the violation notice into my chest so hard the corner scraped my collarbone. Marissa Camden didn't even wait for me to step off the gravel path, leading to my grandfather's valley cabin. She stood there like she owned the entire mountain, chin high, breath sharp, eyes full of that familiar HOA hunger for control. The board chair barked something about unauthorized occupancy, but the words blurred under the weight of her arrogance. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was performing domination. I let her finish her whole tirade. Then I dropped the truth she never expected. I wouldn't push too hard on boundaries out here, I said quietly, steady. You're standing on land that doesn't belong to you. Her face twitched, just once, but it was enough. The enforcer in crimson froze mid-breath, her certainty cracking at the edges. She didn't know what I knew, not yet, but the shift in power hit her before the words fully sank in. And if you've ever felt that jolt, the moment a bully realizes you're not the one bending, stay with me and hit the subscribe button now. She drew herself taller, trying to reclaim ground. This cabin isn't approved. You're in violation the moment you stepped foot here. I took a slow breath, steadying the anger tightening in my ribs. Name's Evan, I said, and before you start throwing rules at me, you should know I've spent 2 decades mapping this valley down to the inch. Her eyebrows flickered as I continued, calm but anchored. Every ridge, every easement, every old plat line. My grandfather walked them with me. I know this land better than anyone still breathing. The clipboard queen didn't like that. Her stance hardened, fingers tightening on the violation slip. Control slipping scared her. You could see it in the way she adjusted her blazer like armor, but she had no idea why this place mattered, why her demand to vacate until further review hit like a punch. This cabin wasn't just shelter. It was the last piece of my grandfather I had left. I remembered the mornings he'd take me out before sunrise, his old boots crushing frost as he pointed to the boundary stone, the carved marker he'd placed himself. "This is ours, Evan," he'd say, voice soft but unstoppable. "And one day, you'll be the one protecting it." I didn't realize those were instructions as much as memories until he was gone. No goodbye, no final wisdom, just the weight of legacy landing squarely on my shoulders. So, when the tyrant in heels told me this place violated architectural harmony, something inside me tightened. This wasn't about siding colors or property lines. This was about someone trying to erase the last inheritance my family left me. "I'm not moving," I told her. The officer of rules leaned in, eyes sharp. "You don't get to make that decision." But she was wrong, and soon she'd understand how wrong. Behind her, the valley breeze moved through the pines, brushing past the old cabin walls I had spent months repairing. Every board, every nail, every patch of sanded timber carried a memory. This wasn't a project. It was a promise, a lifeline, a return to the only place that had ever felt like home. Still, Marissa Camden kept talking, layering threats, fines, demands, each one louder than the last. But I was listening to something else, the silence between her words, the place where panic hides when someone realizes the power they thought they held is slipping through their fingers. "It's not personal," she claimed, but it was, because this cabin was all I had left of the man who raised me. Because she didn't just attack my home, she attacked my history. And I wasn't the same quiet kid who used to swallow injustice. Not anymore. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know what this land really was. And she definitely didn't know who it belonged to. She didn't leave right away. Marissa Camden lingered at the edge of my gravel path, like she was staking a claim, her heels planted deep in the dirt, as if the earth itself should bow to her authority. The sun caught the edges of her red blazer, turning her into a bright warning flare against the valley's quiet backdrop. The board chair scanned the cabin again, slow, judgmental, as if memorizing every angle she intended to weaponize later. "I'll be filing daily fines until you vacate," she said, "and trust me, Evan, those add up fast out here." Her confidence would have rattled most people, but I wasn't most people. I'd seen enough HOA power plays in my career as a surveyor to recognize when someone was bluffing their way through ignorance. She didn't know the boundaries out here. She didn't know the history. She didn't know the truth, but she thought loud enough to drown out reality. When she finally turned her back, the enforcer in crimson strutted down the path like she'd just conquered something. I watched her go, not because I feared her, but because moments like that tell you more about a person than any complaint letter ever will. She needed the last word. She needed eyes on her. She needed control. And I knew exactly the type. The kind who thought authority was a costume you put on, not something you earned. As her car rumbled away, dust swirling in her wake, I walked toward the cabin porch, toward the place that still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The boards groaned under my boots, familiar, welcoming in a way nothing else had been since my grandfather passed. I paused at the threshold, letting the air settle around me. This wasn't just a home, it was a line in the sand. Inside, I set my pack down and stepped toward the window overlooking the valley floor. From here, you could see the ridge where the HOA development ended. Modern. Houses perched high, polished, trimmed, manicured, and below it, the untouched valley where the older properties sat, holding stories deeper than anything the HOA bylaws could imagine. I wasn't alone down here. A lot of long-timers lived outside the HOA's grasp, and the moment the clipboard queen started sniffing around my cabin, word spread faster than wildfire. Within an hour, I heard footsteps approaching, slow, hesitant, uncertain. When I looked up, Howard Briggs stood at the bottom of the steps. The old-timer had lived here longer than anyone. His face carried decades of sun, wind, and mountain grit. He held his hat in his hands like he hadn't decided yet whether he was visiting or apologizing. "She's stirring up the ridge again, isn't she?" he said, voice low. "You heard her all the way out there?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Son, you could hear that woman 3 counties over. The tyrant in heels wasn't just a nuisance to me then. She was building a pattern, one that had pushed residents out, forced compliance where it wasn't owed, and created a climate where fear wore a name and lipstick color." Howard shifted, uncomfortable. "Be careful. Folks around here, well, they don't all fight her, some just fold." "I'm not folding," I said. But even as I said it, I could feel the weight pressing in. It wasn't just the violation notice. It was the history of every resident Marissa Camden had steamrolled with the confidence of someone who believed no one would ever challenge her. And that was the problem. No one ever had. The officer of rules thrived because she'd never been tested by someone who understood land, law, and legacy the way I did. She didn't know the cabin's history. She didn't know the original plat boundaries. She didn't know her entire threat hung on a single fragile assumption, that this valley was under her control. But assumptions crack under pressure. Howard left me with a warning glance, the kind that spoke of stories he wasn't ready to share. And when he disappeared into the trees, I stood on the porch, staring at the boundary stone half buried in moss. My grandfather's mark, my inheritance, my line in the earth. And for the first time, I realized something important. This wasn't just my fight. The HOA's reach had stretched too far for too long. And if the clipboard queen thought she was going to uproot the legacy my grandfather built, she had no idea what kind of war she'd just started. I didn't even make it to my truck the next morning before trouble showed up again. The rumble of an engine crawled up the valley road, too slow to be casual and too smooth to belong to any of the old-timers who lived down here. When the vehicle rounded the bend, I wasn't surprised. Marissa Camden stepped out before the dust even settled, her red blazer sharp against the green of the tree line. The board chair had returned for another round, like she couldn't stand the idea of losing momentum overnight. She strutted toward me with that signature confidence, chin raised, eyes narrowed, heels stabbing into the dirt like she was punishing the ground for existing. And right behind her, moving slower, quieter, almost reluctant, came someone I hadn't met yet, but recognized by reputation alone. Oliver Hale, HOA treasurer, the man who always stood beside the enforcer in crimson, but never fully with her. He walked like he wished he were invisible. "Evan," Marissa Camden announced, crossing her arms. "We need to discuss your mounting violations." Of course she did. She needed control the way some people needed air. But it wasn't her that caught my attention. It was Oliver. His eyes kept tracking the cabin, then the valley floor, then the boundary markers near the creek. His hands fidgeted at the edge of his clipboard like he was holding something he shouldn't. Something was wrong with him. Very wrong. The clipboard queen kept talking. Lists of alleged fines, threats of liens, references to bylaws that didn't apply down here. But my focus stayed on the man beside her, Oliver wasn't nodding along like the others did. He wasn't adding pressure. He wasn't matching her energy at all. His shoulders curled inward, as if shrinking from her sharpness. She whipped the papers toward me. Initial here, confirming receipt. I didn't move, but I did look at Oliver, directly. He flinched. "You okay there?" I asked him. He blinked fast, throat shifting with a swallowed answer. His body said yes, his eyes said absolutely not. And that mismatch spoke louder than anything the tyrant in heels was spitting out. "We don't have time for whatever this is," she snapped. "Oliver, hand him the updated compliance sheet." He didn't. His fingers tightened around the papers instead of releasing them. A bead of sweat formed at the edge of his temple. His breathing quickened just enough for someone observant to catch it. The officer of rules noticed, and she did not like hesitation. She leaned toward him, voice sharp but low. "Oliver, now." He swallowed again, then lifted the sheet halfway, but his gaze hit the cabin, then the boundary stone, and a flicker of fear crossed his face. Not fear of me, fear of what she was doing, fear of what he knew. "Oliver," I said quietly, "you've seen the valley maps, haven't you?" His hand shook. Just once, but enough. Marissa Camden spun toward me. "That's none of your business." But it was. And now I was certain. The HOA treasurer wasn't standing here because she needed him. He was here because he knew something about this land, and she couldn't risk him talking. Oliver finally forced himself to meet my eyes, and what I saw wasn't loyalty. It was conflict. Deep, painful conflict. His jaw clenched like he was trying to hold words inside that were clawing to escape. His shoulders lifted in a subtle inhale, an unconscious bracing motion. He was trapped between truth and obedience. The clipboard queen stepped between us, blocking his line of sight. Any further attempts to manipulate board members will be documented as harassment. Manipulate? I hadn't said a damn thing except ask if he was okay, but she reacted like someone who knew her weakest link was about to break. I let the silence stretch, long enough for Oliver to feel it, long enough for her to feel him wavering under her shadow, long enough for the air to thicken with the tension she tried to control but couldn't. Finally, she snapped her fingers, actually snapped them, and Oliver jolted like an animal trained by punishment. "Let's go," she barked. He hesitated, for half a second, a tremor of rebellion in his stance. Then he followed her back to the SUV. As the doors slammed and the vehicle pulled away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Oliver wasn't loyal to her. He was scared, and scared men don't shake for no reason. Something was buried beneath this HOA facade. Something about boundaries, jurisdiction, and paperwork the enforcer in crimson didn't want anyone to see. And Oliver Hale. He was the crack forming in her perfect armor. By the time the sun dipped behind the western ridge, I had barely settled into the rhythm of repairing the porch rail when the valley quiet snapped again, this time with the hard crunch of tires on gravel, way too fast for anyone coming here peacefully. I straightened, heart steady, jaw tightening, because I already knew who had returned before the SUV even came into view. Marissa Camden didn't just step out. She exploded out of the driver's seat like the world had personally offended her. The board chair had her blazer on again, that bold, burning red she used like a battle flag. Her heels stabbed the ground with more fury than precision as she marched toward my cabin, waving a thick stack of papers like they were weapons instead of documents. Behind her, 2 HOA committee members trailed with clipboards, measuring tapes, and a camera. Reinforcements. She'd escalated. Fast. "Evan," she snapped, voice slicing across the yard. "You've now accumulated 8 violations. 8 in 24 hours. She held up the papers as if I couldn't count. Structural inconsistencies, unauthorized residency, non-compliant exterior finishes, dangerous slope erosion, visual disharmony, and you made half of those up," I said. The enforcer in crimson stiffened. "I don't fabricate violations. I enforce them." "On land you don't control," I answered. That hit her, direct to the center. Her lips tightened, but she pushed past it. "We're doing an emergency site audit," she declared, effective immediately. One of the committee members lifted his camera and began photographing my porch, every shutter click echoing like distant gunfire. The other stretched a tape measure toward my cabin's siding. pretending to assess some invisible defect. The clipboard queen supervised like a general overseeing troops. "You can't audit property that doesn't fall under your jurisdiction," I said. She smiled, a slow, dangerous smile meant to intimidate. "We'll see about that." I watched the committee scramble around my land like buzzards, measuring shadows, photographing knots in wood, documenting air as if it were a crime. But it wasn't their frantic actions that bothered me. It was her silence, calculated, predatory. The tyrant in heels stood near the boundary stone, staring at it like it was a personal insult. She bent down, running her fingers along the carved surface. "This is out of compliance," she said. "Markers like this require HOA approval. My grandfather placed that stone 40 years before your HOA existed," I said. "That's irrelevant." "No," I countered. "That's everything." She stood, dusting her hands like she'd touched something filthy. "This valley will follow our rules, whether you like it or not." Behind her, the committee members exchanged uncertain glances. Even they seemed unsure, but she pressed on, feeding off her own momentum. "We'll be issuing fines daily," she continued, "and if you refuse to comply, we'll pursue legal remedies." That word, legal, landed like a struck match. It wasn't just bluster, it was a dare, a challenge. And it was the opening I needed, because she didn't understand that every threat she made pushed her deeper into territory she didn't own, not physically, not historically, and definitely not legally. Her confidence came from ignorance, and ignorance always collapsed under scrutiny. Still, she wasn't finished. The officer of rules circled back toward me, her entourage trailing behind like obedient shadows. "This valley cabin will not stand in violation of architectural harmony," she said. "Either you adjust it to meet standards or—" "It's not under your standards," I said again, calm. Her jaw twitched, tiny, sharp, a pressure point she couldn't hide. I stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between us. "You ever wonder why the original HOA maps don't show this valley? Why older residents aren't on your rolls? Why no one here pays dues?" A flicker of something, recognition maybe, crossed her expression. She masked it fast. "You're misinterpreting outdated documents," she said coldly. "The HOA has expansion rights, not retroactive ones." For the first time today, she didn't have a sharp comeback ready. Instead, she pivoted, snapping orders at her committee members with renewed desperation. They scattered, too eager to avoid her gaze. The whole performance reeked of someone trying to maintain control while the truth pressed against the walls she'd built. She marched back to her SUV, heels crunching like brittle bones. "This isn't over," Marissa Camden warned. "Not even close." She wasn't wrong, but she had no idea that her escalation, this reckless, frantic audit, was about to lead me straight to the flaw in her entire operation. The morning after the chaotic audit, the valley felt unsettled, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I woke early, still replaying every move Marissa Camden had made, every frantic command she'd hurled at her committee. The board chair hadn't been gathering evidence. She'd been scrambling to justify a claim she already knew was fragile. That realization stayed with me as I headed toward the creek to inspect yesterday's damage. The creek ran low this season, revealing more of the rocky bank than usual. I traced the edge slowly, running my hand over the soil, noting where the audit crew had trampled vegetation. To anyone else it looked messy, but to me, it showed something important. The natural grade hadn't shifted in decades. Claims of slope erosion were pure invention, another weapon the enforcer in Crimson had fabricated. But something more critical caught my attention. A survey stake, new, bright, and absolutely out of place, sat jammed into the bank where no official marker should be. I crouched and checked the alignment. Wrong orientation, wrong elevation, wrong everything. Only someone unfamiliar with original Valley plats would place it there, which meant the clipboard queen wasn't just overreaching, she was constructing an illusion of authority, one false marker at a time. I straightened and scanned the surrounding tree line, replaying every boundary walk I'd done with my grandfather. This stake didn't match any historical grid. It didn't match county GIS. It didn't match natural landform logic. And that's when the realization hit hard. The HOA wasn't confused. They were attempting to redraw lines they never had the right to touch. The violation wasn't mine. It was theirs. As I documented the incorrect placement with my own equipment, the sound of hesitant footsteps approached from behind. I didn't turn immediately. I already suspected who it was. When I finally glanced back, Oliver Hale stood at the path's edge, shifting awkwardly, tension radiating off him. The man looked torn in half, loyalty to the HOA pulling one direction, conscience dragging him the other. He shouldn't have put that there, Oliver said quietly, almost whispering it into the ground. He didn't gesture to the stake, but he didn't need to. His guilt already traced a line straight to it. His eyes darted toward the ridge, as if expecting the tyrant in heels to appear from the shadows. His breath came fast, uneven. He wasn't built for confrontation, but something inside him was breaking. I didn't place it, he added quickly, eyes widening. She told someone else to. Said the board needed proof of terrain instability. His throat tightened. But the ground hasn't shifted, not once. You know that. Everyone down here knows that. He pressed a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. She's pushing too far, Evan. This isn't procedure. It's personal. I stepped beside the creek again, leveling my instrument, adjusting it until the measurement locked in. There it was. The proof I needed. The natural grade hadn't deviated more than a fraction of an inch since my grandfather first charted it. And suddenly, the discovery crystallized. The HOA's accusations weren't based on data, but manipulation. The officer of rules was manufacturing justification for control she'd never legally possessed. Oliver watched me quietly, shoulders heavy with the weight of what he'd revealed. If she finds out I said anything, he murmured, unfinished fear hanging in the air. I closed my notebook gently. You didn't, I said. His relief was immediate, but fragile. He wasn't ready to stand against Marissa Camden, not yet. But the crack in her armor widened another inch, and she didn't even know it. As he left, moving with the same nervous caution as before, I stood alone in the fading afternoon light, staring at the stake, the creek, the grade. The evidence was clear. My discovery wasn't from a basement or a drawer. It was written in the land itself. And it was the beginning. By sunrise the next day, the valley felt heavier, charged like a storm waiting to break. I barely slept after finding that fraudulent survey stake, and the more I replayed Oliver's shaken confession, the clearer the picture became. Marissa Camden wasn't simply enforcing rules. She was constructing a narrative, one she hoped would choke out every valley resident until the HOA controlled land it had no legal claim to. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I grabbed my gear, rangefinder, digital level, elevation rod, and headed toward the ridgeline. If the board chair wanted to manufacture erosion, instability, or boundary creep, I'd meet her with the truth carved into the earth long before her HOA arrived. My grandfather used to say the land never lies. People do, and right now, someone in a red blazer was lying loud enough for the whole mountain to hear. Up on the ridge, the air thinned, carrying the first golden stretch of daylight. From here, I could see the entire valley floor, the cabin below, the creek shimmering like a silver ribbon. I measured the grade again, took soil compaction readings, snapped time-stamped photos. All indisputable evidence. Each new data point aligned perfectly with historical values. Zero deviation, zero instability, zero justification for the enforcer in crimson and her cooked-up claims. This wasn't just HOA overreach. It was deliberate misrepresentation. As I worked, the crunch of hurried footsteps cut through the quiet. I turned expecting a hiker, maybe Howard checking in, but instead, Oliver Hale stumbled through the brush, breathless and pale as chalk. His clothes were still wrinkled from yesterday's HOA rounds. His clipboard clutched to his chest like he didn't know whether to hide behind it or throw it away. She's escalating, he managed, voice trembling. I tried to talk her down. I really did. But she's filing an emergency injunction. I froze. On what grounds? She claims your cabin is causing slope destabilization and runoff hazards. His voice cracked. She's submitting photos from yesterday's audit. The photos from where her team walked all over the bank? I asked. He flinched, hard. She said they were natural erosion indicators. Unbelievable. The clipboard queen was fabricating evidence in real time. And there's more, he added, lowering his voice as if the trees might be listening. She's calling a board vote tonight. Private session, no residents. She plans to authorize an order to bar you from occupancy. There it was, the urgency in his eyes, the fear tightening every muscle across his face. Oliver wasn't just scared of her temper anymore. He was scared of being complicit. He paced in a tight circle, rubbing his temples. She won't listen to anyone. She won't check the county database. She won't look at the historical maps. His voice broke, revealing the fracture fully. She wants control, Evan. She wants this valley written under HOA jurisdiction, and she's willing to twist every rule to make it happen. His breathing was uneven now, shoulders trembling as he struggled between obedience and conscience. This wasn't a man built for conflict, but something in him was begging for release, for truth. I set my equipment aside and faced him. Oliver, listen. Boundaries here were defined before the HOA existed. The original plats have legal priority. Her claims won't hold in a review. I know, he whispered, voice cracking. That's the problem. He sank onto a fallen log, hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped his clipboard. Nervous energy radiated from him, the visible internal war of someone stuck beneath the heel of the tyrant in heels for far too long. She told the board you're refusing compliance, he said. Told them you're ignoring safety protocols. And if they believe her, they'll proceed with the injunction. But she can't enforce an injunction on land outside HOA boundaries. Exactly. His eyes met mine, exhausted, pleading. Evan, she's crossing lines she doesn't understand. The truth settled between us like a stone. My discovery at the creek wasn't just a clue. It was the turning point. The HOA wasn't only wrong, they were about to entangle themselves in violations they couldn't escape. I took one final measurement from the ridge, locking in the elevation reading, another perfect match to county records, another nail in the coffin of her fabricated claims. Tonight's vote, I said, will be the moment she overplays her hand. Oliver swallowed, nodding, torn but hopeful. I can't stop her, but I don't want to be part of this anymore. You won't have to, I said, because the land had spoken, and soon everyone else would hear it too. Night settled over the valley in a thick, unmoving hush, the kind that made every sound feel amplified. I sat on the cabin porch, reviewing the measurements I'd collected, perfect matches to historical records, every one of them. But I wasn't waiting on numbers now. I was waiting on a man whose internal war had been visible in every tremor, every swallow, every avoided eye contact. And right on cue, footsteps approached, soft, unsure, hesitant. Oliver Hale emerged from the shadows like someone stepping out of a confession booth, breath shaky, shoulders hunched as if he expected Marissa Camden to leap out from behind a tree and throttle him for disobedience. Even in the dim light, his guilt radiated off him. He didn't speak at first, just stood at the foot of the porch, clutching his clipboard like a shield he desperately wished he could abandon. You came, I said quietly. His nod was tiny, barely movement at all, but the decision behind it was enormous. I can't keep doing this, he whispered. I thought HOA work was supposed to help the community, not crush it. He stepped onto the porch, hands trembling. The emotional struggle was written across every line of his posture. He was a man caught between survival and integrity, trapped under the weight of a woman who wielded rules like blades. Marissa Camden had created this fear. The board chair used power the way wildfire used oxygen, consuming everything near her. Oliver wiped his palms on his slacks. Before the vote tonight, you need to know something she's been hiding. I didn't interrupt. He needed the space. He took a shuddering breath. The HOA's expansion map, the one she claims includes this valley, his voice cracked. It was never certified, never approved, never filed with the county. She's been showing the board an internal draft version, one that only she controls. The air stilled. She told the board it was stamped and recorded. She lied. The enforcer in crimson had been pushing a map that held no legal weight, a fraud, a phantom jurisdiction created through intimidation and repetition. Oliver shook his head, choking on the words. I've seen the real county record. The valley isn't inside HOA boundaries. It never was. And she knows that, Evan. She's known the whole time. His voice trembled with anger now, the first spark I'd seen in him. She buried the original boundary file, hid it from the board. She said Valley properties were pending integration. But that's impossible. Legally impossible. The clipboard queen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it. Oliver paced the porch, wringing his hands. If this comes out, she'll blame me. She'll say I withheld documents. She'll ruin me. That's why she keeps you close, I said. Because you're the only one who's seen everything. He looked at me, eyes glassy with exhaustion and fear. I don't want to be her shield anymore. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not a confession forced, not information stolen, but a man choosing truth over fear. He handed me his clipboard, not dramatically, not with any grand gesture. Just a quiet, deliberate offering. A man placing his integrity in someone else's hands. Inside, it wasn't documents or secret files. It was a hand-drawn map of the valley he'd sketched himself. Original plat lines, creek boundaries, the ridge break, the slopes. Every line matched my readings. It was living, breathing evidence from someone who knew the land well enough to contradict Marissa Camden's fantasy expansion. This is the real valley layout, he said. If you bring this to the board tonight, they won't be able to ignore it, not with your credentials behind it. I studied the map. Every marker aligned with the original county plats my grandfather once traced with his calloused fingers. It wasn't an official document, but it was an accurate one. A map drawn by a man wrestling with truth, finally choosing the right side. He stepped back, breath trembling. I won't testify, not yet. I'm not ready for her to target me, but this, he pointed to the map, is my part, my way of saying I won't help her lie anymore. The tyrant in heels had just lost her safeguard, and she didn't even know it. I folded the map carefully. You did the right thing, Oliver. He nodded, shoulders easing for the first time since I'd met him. Just be careful. She's going to fight hard tonight, harder than she ever has. I know, I said, because tonight's board vote wasn't going to be her victory. It was going to be her unraveling. I didn't waste a second after Oliver slipped back into the darkness. His hand-drawn map lay open across my kitchen table, edges trembling under the fan's slow rotation, the ink still fresh enough to glisten in places. Every line he'd sketched matched the grade readings I'd taken across the valley. Every boundary aligned perfectly with the original plats my grandfather once walked me through, and every detail proved what Marissa Camden had been hiding from the board. This wasn't just ammunition. This was the fuse that would set her entire operation on fire. I spread my own survey logs beside Oliver's drawing, elevation profiles, stability records, slope data, hydrology notes from the creek bed. When lined up, the evidence formed a clean, irrefutable picture. The HOA's fabricated erosion hazards were impossible. The land was stable, the boundaries were fixed, and the valley remained outside their jurisdiction. The board chair was about to walk into a vote she assumed she'd already won. She had no idea she was stepping into a war built on ground that would collapse the moment someone with credentials, someone like me, spoke the truth. As the sun dropped fully behind the ridgeline, painting the cabin in the burnt orange shadows, I assembled what I needed. Not folders, not secret documents, just undeniable data collected through professional expertise, the one weapon the clipboard queen never anticipated facing. I packed my rangefinder, my elevation logs, time-stamped photos, and Oliver's map. I tucked the notebook my grandfather once carried into the side pocket of my bag. Not because I needed it for evidence, but because tonight was about honoring him, his legacy, his lines drawn in this earth long before the HOA planted their first ornamental tree. A distant hum rose through the valley, cars, multiple engines, heading toward the ridge. The board was gathering. I slung the bag over my shoulder and stepped outside, locking the cabin door behind me. The air was cool, sharp with pine, and a faint trace of smoke from Howard Briggs' fire pit down the road. As I walked toward the truck, Howard himself appeared from the shadows, arms crossed over his chest, gaze fixed on me with a mix of worry and respect. "Heard they're holding a vote tonight," he said. "You ready?" "As ready as they don't want me to be." He gave a slow nod. "Good. Someone needs to stand up to her." Her. He didn't need to say the name. Even the valley trees flinched at the mention of the enforcer in crimson. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The headlights cut through the dusk as I drove toward the upper ridge, the road winding tighter the closer I got to HOA territory. The developed section of Blue Ridge Valley Estates came into view. Manicured lawns, identical homes, rigid lines that reflected the personality of the tyrant in heels who'd forced conformity upon them. When I parked outside the clubhouse, I could already feel the tension humming through the walls. Through the glass, I saw board members settling into their seats, papers stacked, screens glowing, and at the center of it all, pacing with predatory purpose, stood Marissa Camden. Red blazer sharp, arms stiff, eyes slicing across the room as she prepared her performance. She hadn't seen me yet. Perfect. I stepped inside, every head turning. Whispers rose instantly, a ripple of unease moving through the room. The officer of rules stopped mid-step when she finally noticed me. She froze, as if my presence alone threatened the outcome she'd so carefully engineered. "This is a private board session," she snapped. I didn't even blink. Then it's the perfect place to correct a fatal mistake before you vote on it. The committee members shifted uneasily. They recognized the confidence in my voice, not aggression, but authority. Professional authority. Something they'd never heard directed at her. I set my bag down on the table and opened it slowly, deliberately. Rangefinder, elevation logs, time stamped, terrain photos, and Oliver's map. Her eyes flickered, a tiny involuntary movement, but enough. The clipboard queen regained her composure with a brittle smile. "You can't bring outside documents?" "These aren't documents," I said, spreading the data across the table. "They're measurements, real ones, taken on your so-called erosion site." A murmur swept through the board. I continued. "Your audit created the only disruption out there. The natural terrain is stable. Your claims aren't just wrong, they contradict county records." Tension thickened the room like smoke. "And your jurisdiction," I added, lifting Oliver's map. "It ends exactly where these lines do." Her jaw clenched. The crack widened. Tonight wasn't the confrontation. Tonight was the setup, and I was walking her step by step into her own undoing. Silence hit the boardroom like a thrown brick. My evidence lay spread across the long oak table. Maps, measurements, photos. Each piece a quiet indictment against the story Marissa Camden had been weaving for weeks. She hovered at the far end, arms tight across her chest, red blazer glowing under the fluorescent lights like a warning flare. The board chair didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't breathe wrong. She was calculating. She always was. I watched her eyes dart to Oliver's hand-drawn map, just for a split second, but the flicker was enough to confirm everything. She recognized it. She feared it. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Marissa, these measurements, they're irrelevant," the enforcer in crimson snapped, slicing through his sentence. "This is a private session, and Mr. Rourke is not authorized to participate." I leaned forward, calm. "Then you should feel confident enough to let the data speak for itself." A low murmur swept through the table. Uneasy, uncertain. Some of them genuinely didn't know they'd been fed doctored boundaries. Others did, but hadn't expected anyone to challenge the narrative with expertise strong enough to crush it. "This meeting was not scheduled for debate," she continued, heels clicking sharply as she moved along the table. "We're here to vote on enforcement measures and proceed with the injunction." I stepped closer to the center, placing my hand on the edge of the table. "You're about to vote on an injunction for property you don't legally control." A ripple of tension. Every eye in the room shifted. The clipboard queen whipped around, fury cracking through her expression. "Enough! You can't just walk in here and—" "I'm a licensed land surveyor," I said, voice steady. "My professional assessment is admissible in any review, and right now, I'm telling you, your boundary claim is invalid." Her jaw tightened, hard. I spread the elevation logs across the table, each sheet showing identical grades across decades. "Your erosion claim has no basis. Your audit created the only disturbance out there. And these photos, taken before your team trampled the bank, prove it." A board member with silver hair leaned forward. "Is that true? The audit caused the disruption?" Marissa Camden didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence betrayed her. I continued, placing Oliver's map beside my data. "These lines match the original county plats. The valley wasn't included in the HOA's incorporation. And your so-called expansion map?" I paused, meeting her eyes. "It was never certified." Gasps. Actual gasps. The tyrant in heels lunged toward the table, snatching the map. This is unauthorized material. You can't present hand-drawn sketches as legal evidence. But the boundaries match county records, one of the younger board members murmured. I've seen the plats. They look exactly like this. Her eyes shot daggers at him. He recoiled. I folded my arms. Your treasurer knows the truth. Oliver, seated near the corner, froze. His face went pale. He stared at the papers on the table like they might detonate. Sweat dotted his temples, fingers digging into the clipboard he still clung to like a safety rail. The officer of rules saw his hesitation. Her gaze sharpened, calculating. Oliver, tell them. Tell them the valley is pending integration. He didn't. He couldn't. His throat bobbed, breath trembling. His eyes darted toward mine, then toward the map, then back to her, and something inside him snapped. A tiny, silent fracture, but real. I can't confirm that, he whispered. The room froze. She turned slowly, venom dripping from her stare. What did you say? Oliver swallowed hard. The valley isn't officially part of the HOA, not according to the last certified record. The board erupted, half in shock, half in relief, half in fear. Voices overlapped, papers rustled, chairs scraped, all while Marissa Camden stood motionless, her expression tightening into something brittle and dangerous. I spoke over the chaos. You're about to vote on an illegal injunction. If this goes forward, it won't be my problem. It'll be yours. They heard it. They felt it. The consequences, the downfall, the unraveling. And at the center of it all, the clipboard queen looked like she'd swallowed glass. We're not voting tonight, the silver-haired board member said firmly. We need clarity, real clarity. This is absurd, she shouted. It's final, he said, turning away. The vote was dead. Her plan shattered. Tonight wasn't the confrontation, but it was the collapse of her foundation. And when I stepped out into the cold night air, one thing was undeniable. She wasn't done fighting, but neither was I. The cold night air followed me all the way back down the ridge, but it wasn't the wind that kept my pulse sharp and steady. It was the look Marissa Camden gave me as the board adjourned. Not anger, not frustration. Something far more dangerous. Calculation. The board chair wasn't used to losing even a single inch of ground, and tonight she'd lost an entire battlefield. But she wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She was the type who reorganized, rearmed, and struck when people least expected it, which meant I needed to be ready before she even had the chance. At dawn, I loaded my truck again, not with tools this time, but with a plan. If she wanted to escalate, I'd meet her escalation with precision she couldn't outrun. The valley wasn't protected by emotion. It was protected by law. The key now wasn't gathering more data. It was positioning it in the right hands at the right moment. And that moment was coming faster than I anticipated. Halfway down the road, I spotted Howard Briggs leaning against his mailbox, arms crossed, watching the ridge like he expected flames to erupt. Everything about his posture screamed concern. When I slowed beside him, he didn't move. Heard the board meeting didn't end the way she wanted, Howard said. His tone held no question, just certainty. No, it didn't, I answered. He huffed a breath. She was on the phone half the night, pacing, yelling, something about regaining control. That tracked. The enforcer in crimson didn't unravel quietly. When her authority cracked, she lashed out until she felt powerful again. Howard stepped closer, voice dropping. You should know. Folks around here are talking. They're wondering if this might finally be the moment someone stands up to her. I met his gaze. Someone has to. He nodded, slow and heavy. Good, because the valley needs you sharper than ever right now. As I drove past him, his words stayed with me. Responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just to defend my cabin, but to protect everyone the HOA had intimidated for years. The board might have paused the vote, but that only cornered Marissa Camden further, made her more unpredictable. When I reached the county office later that morning, I parked and took a long breath. Today wasn't about confrontation. It was about positioning the truth where it couldn't be buried. Inside, the halls buzzed with quiet administrative chaos, papers shuffling, phones ringing, boots clicking on tile floors. I approached the counter. I need to speak to someone in land records, I said. The attendant nodded and led me to a small office with a wide window overlooking the courthouse lawn. A county mapper greeted me warmly. Older man, sharp eyes, steady hands. He recognized my name before I introduced myself. "Heard your valley has stirred up quite a commotion," he said. "What do you need?" I opened my bag slowly, laying out the same items I'd shown the board, but arranged with surgical intention. Each measurement, every photo, the alignment of Oliver's drawn map with the original plats, the elevation log showing decades of stability. I walked him through it piece by piece, letting the evidence speak louder than any accusation could. He studied everything in thoughtful silence, eyes narrowing only when he reached Oliver's map. "These boundaries?" he murmured, tracing the lines. "They match the certified record, down to the foot." "Yes," I said, "and the HOA has been treating that valley as if they own it." His head lifted sharply like a man who'd just caught a lie mid-sentence. "That's not possible. The incorporation documents don't extend past the ridge. That land belongs to private parcels." "Exactly." He sat back, stunned. Not emotional, but professionally offended. "This isn't just overreach. This is a jurisdictional violation." "And she plans to act on it," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Not anymore, she doesn't." He began drafting an official review request, one that would require the HOA to present certified boundaries and justification for all enforcement actions. A request they couldn't satisfy, because they had nothing official, nothing legal, nothing binding. This was the step the clipboard queen never anticipated, her narrative being challenged not by rebellion, but by process, by law, by professionals who cared about accuracy more than power. When I left the office, the mapper's last words echoed behind me. "I'll bring this to the county board myself, and when I do, they'll have no choice but to confront her." Good. Because the next confrontation wasn't going to happen in her boardroom. It was going to happen in public, where her rules couldn't shield her, and her red blazer couldn't disguise the truth she'd buried. By the time I reached the clubhouse that evening, cars already lined both sides of the road. Neighbors who never attended meetings were showing up in droves. Word had spread fast through the valley and up the ridge. People weren't here for a routine session. They were here because Marissa Camden had finally pushed the community past its breaking point. The air buzzed with low conversation. Tension curled through every voice. Inside, every seat was filled. Residents stood along the walls, arms crossed, eyes sharp, waiting. This wasn't a board meeting anymore. This was a public reckoning. At the center of it all stood Marissa Camden herself, red blazer blazing under the overhead lights like battle armor. The board chair scanned the crowd with a taut smile stretched so tight it looked painful. Her jaw flexed as she struck her gavel once. Too hard, too loud. "Order," she said, voice strained. "This meeting will proceed according to HOA protocol." Not tonight, it wouldn't. She launched into her usual routine. Violations, compliance reminders, fines. But the crowd wasn't biting. Murmurs rippled through the room. People shifted, restless. Even the board members appeared uneasy, glancing toward one another instead of her. The tension only sharpened when she reached the line item she'd clearly been bracing for. "Next," she said, "we will review the occupancy and structural violations associated with the Valley Cabin." "No," someone said from the back. Heads snapped toward the voice. Howard Briggs stepped forward, his presence commanding the room without effort. "You're not steamrolling anyone tonight, Marissa," he said. "Not after what we've learned." Her eyes widened. Not fear, rage. Real, unfiltered rage. "I will have order." But the enforcer in crimson had already lost it. I rose from my seat. "You wanted this handled publicly? Let's handle it publicly." The room quieted to a tense hush. All eyes rested on me. She stiffened. "You are not recognized to speak." "Then unrecognize me," I said. "But the county records department already heard everything, and they'll be watching what happens tonight." A shockwave moved through the crowd. Her nostrils flared. "This meeting is for residents under HOA jurisdiction." "That's funny," I replied, "because the valley isn't under HOA jurisdiction. It never was." Gasps erupted. She slammed her gavel again. "Lies! He's lying. The expansion map was never certified," I said, cutting her off. The board members froze. I pulled out my bag and placed the documents on the center table. My measurements, my photos, my logs, and finally, Oliver's map. The clipboard queen lunged toward it like she meant to snatch it away, but the silver-haired board member stepped between us. "Sit down, Marissa. he said quietly, firmly. Her entire body recoiled, disbelief twisting her face into something vicious. "This is nonsense," she hissed. "Fabricated. He's manipulating all of you." I lifted my phone and pressed play. The recording played loud enough for everyone to hear. Oliver's trembling voice from earlier, describing the uncertified expansion draft she'd been waving around for years. Her face drained of color. Oliver, seated near the wall, looked like he might faint. But he didn't run. He didn't hide. He stayed still, shoulders shaking, but eyes forward. The tyrant in heels snapped her attention toward him. "You traitor!" she spat. "No," he whispered. "I'm just done lying." The crowd murmured, the sound growing louder, angrier, as people realized how long they'd been deceived. Some residents stepped forward. Others shouted questions. Someone demanded a full investigation. The officer of rules backed toward the podium, heels clicking unevenly now, all poise gone. "This is a smear campaign," she barked. "None of this changes the fact that the cabin is in violation." "It changes everything," I said, "because you never had the authority to issue a single violation. Not to me, not to anyone in the valley. You've threatened people for years with rules you never had the right to enforce." A woman from the ridge shouted. "She fined me for repainting my door," a man followed. "She threatened lands she couldn't file." Another, "She told us the valley owed back dues." The room erupted, years of pressure boiling over, finally given permission to break. Her gaze darted around in panic as the truth finally outpaced her lies. I stepped closer to the center of the room. "This isn't about me. This is about every person she intimidated, fined, silenced, or bullied." The silver-haired board member stood. "Effective immediately, this board suspends all enforcement actions pending a county audit." The crowd cheered. Marissa Camden went pale. Tonight wasn't her meeting anymore. Tonight was her downfall. The clubhouse emptied slowly, like a storm draining itself after finally breaking open. Voices spilled into the night, relief, anger, disbelief, as neighbors clustered in small groups, processing everything that had just unraveled. I stepped outside into the cool air, the weight of the evening settling over me, but for the first time since returning to the valley, the weight didn't feel like a burden. It felt like momentum. Inside, Marissa Camden was still arguing with the remaining board members, her voice cracked with panic instead of authority. The board chair no longer commanded the room. She merely occupied it, unraveling thread by thread, as the people she once intimidated refused to look at her anymore. Her red blazer, once a symbol of her dominance, now looked like a costume stripped of its meaning. The silver-haired board member followed me out, rubbing his temples. "Evan, thank you," he said quietly. "This could have gone on for years if you hadn't shown up prepared." I nodded, but my focus drifted back to the doorway where the enforcer in crimson paced in frantic loops, eyes wild, gestures sharp. She was fighting a battle that had already ended, clawing desperately at a crown that had slipped from her head. "She's not going to let this go," I said. He gave a tired smile. "That's why the county's stepping in. We already made the call." "Good. Because tonight wasn't enough." "Not yet." As he walked to his car, I saw Oliver standing alone near the far edge of the lot, shoulders slumped, expression fragile but strangely peaceful. His hands were tucked into his pockets, the clipboard he once clung to nowhere in sight. When he noticed me approaching, he straightened as if bracing for something. "You okay?" I asked. He let out a shaky breath. "I don't know, but I will be." He paused. "You were right about everything." "You were brave tonight," I said. He shook his head. "No, but I was honest." His eyes flicked toward the building where the clipboard queen was still spiraling. "I should have spoken up sooner." "Maybe," I said, "but speaking up now still mattered." His voice softened. "What do you think she's going to do?" I looked toward the doors just as Marissa Camden stormed out, heels hammering the pavement. The tyrant in heels scanned the parking lot, hunting for someone to blame. Her rage was visible even from a distance, raw, consuming, stripped of the control she once wielded. She spotted me. Our eyes locked, her stride slowed, her jaw twitched, and for the first time since I'd moved into the valley cabin, I saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, but fear, real fear. The fear of someone who knows her empire isn't just cracking, it's collapsing. She stopped several feet away. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You do." Her breath hitched, and for once she couldn't find a threat to throw back. The officer of rules stood alone in the quiet, stripped of the noise she used to mask her insecurity. "You can't—" "I didn't do anything," I said. "The law did." Her expression splintered. She spun on her heel, got into her SUV, and tore out of the lot, tires spitting gravel as if running from the truth she'd spent years burying. Oliver exhaled shakily. "She's done, isn't she? Tonight?" "Yes," I said, "and soon the county will make it official." He nodded, slow, relieved. I drove back to the valley under a sky full of stars, passing the ridgeline where the HOA territory ended and the land my grandfather loved began. When I reached the cabin, I stepped out and stood beside the boundary stone, running my hand across its weathered surface. The fight hadn't been about walls or rules or architectural harmony. It had been about this: legacy, integrity, truth etched deeper than any bylaw could reach. The valley felt different now, lighter, freer, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. And as I stood there, breath steady, heart finally calm, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It belonged to everyone she'd pushed, threatened, or silenced. A community reclaimed from the grip of someone who mistook authority for ownership. This was the moment the valley got its voice back. And before we close this chapter, if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.